大家好，我是 Yale， 欢迎回来我的频道。今天这一集呢，我邀请到了在美国 FIRE 财富自由提早退休界里面还蛮知名的一位。他原本呢是在拉斯维加斯当老师，在任职的时候呢，他就疯狂的存钱，然后疯狂的投资，在短短几年之内呢，就累积到蛮可观的资产，然后达到财富自由提早退休。好了，我不多说，如果你想知道更多的话呢，就继续看访问吧。但是在访问之前呢，记得我现在呢有个即时的免费教学，如果你还没有参加那个基础理财课程的话呢，是免费的，连结在这个影片下方的第一个连结。OK， 那我们不要多说，就直接开始这个影片吧。Could you give our audience a little bit introduction about yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name's Joe. I live in Seattle, Washington right now. I've lived all over parts of the US and also traveled a lot internationally. I'm here today, I guess, to share a little bit about my story. I was a public school teacher teaching like 9-10-year-olds, saved a lot of money and bought a lot of rental properties and ended up retiring early just before I turned 30 and have spent almost 7 years retired now.
Wow, 7 years. That's a really, really long time. Like, did you have any realization before and after, like what was like before retirement and after retirement in these 7 years?
Well, before was a lot simpler because I have 3 kids now. It's not so much a normal retirement as like being a full-time parent, but I'm divorced, so I have my kids half of the time. So half the time is just craziness with kids nonstop, and then the other half the time when they're with my ex-wife, I sort of have a more normal retirement where I can relax, I can pursue hobbies. I started curling this year. I'm gonna take some improvisational comedy classes this summer.
Really?
Different things like that. Exploring some different interests.
So cool. I want to do that as well. I'm not very good at acting at all. If I don't like you,
I
you
am
can
not
tell.
at all. Yeah, I'm not either, but I'd like to get better. It's been on my bucket list for a while. Like, it makes me a little uncomfortable, you know, and I think that's a fun thing to push my boundaries.
So you were saying like the way you get to retirement is not through investing in index fund like the rest of the FIRE group. Is that correct?
There's a few different paths you can go to early retire. Ultimately, they all have a very similar goal of having all of your expenses covered by your invests. And so whether that is index funds where you sell some periodically or collect dividends, or whether that's rental real estate where I collect rents every month. I have a buddy who is building a business he's going to retire on. And so there's sort of several different paths you can take. But yeah, I think index funds is probably the most common one. But I personally like a lot of the benefits of real estate.
Yeah, totally. I think that one of the reasons why index fund is so popular is practically everyone can do it. But we don't hear a lot of story about, for instance, people like you like investing in real estate. Could you elaborate more of that?
There's a few benefits that I really like. One is I don't really have to worry so much about market crashes. Right now, the stock market, as we're recording this, the stock market just hit, I think it's a low from the past 52 weeks from the last year. It just hit a low point. It's still certainly up a lot over the last few years. I don't have to worry about the ups and downs and that sort of thing. Even in times where the economy sort of struggles, people still need a place to live. So that's sort of a little bit more steady income. And then the fact that it's a little bit faster of a path to FIRE because you can use things like leverage, getting a mortgage, and then having your tenants pay down that mortgage. Lets you not have to save quite as much as you would in order to have just a 4% safe withdrawal rate.
Yeah. One thing my audience asks me when it comes to real estate is when you leverage using the bank's money with high debt portfolio like this. So what happens if people stop renting?
My advice for people who start to get real estate is keep a very healthy cash buffer, because the people who were losing their homes in the last real estate crash in the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, that were over leveraged, the prices of their house dropped and they couldn't afford to keep making their payments. If you are cutting it really close and you don't have a lot of extra funds to cover those sort of tough times, that gets scary. I definitely think anyone in real estate should have a big cash buffer to sort of be able to ride out those times. The other thing I would say is a lot of people who were losing their homes were ones who were speculating on appreciation. So they were cash flow negative every month. And so even when they were rented, they'd have a tenant in there, but the tenant wouldn't even cover the mortgage, and they were just hoping the value of the property would go up. I only buy real estate that's cash flow positive, that is collecting rent and covering the mortgage and extra profit that I can put away for those rainy days every month. So if you're cash flow positive, you don't really have to care about what the value of the home does. So if I have a home that's worth, $200,000, it's rented, the price drops to $150,000. If it's still cash flowing positively, I don't really care what that paper value is. If it doubles to $400,000, I don't really care. I'm not planning on selling it. I'm just collecting the rents. I'm going to hold this for decades. And when you're cash flow positive, you don't really have to care about whatever that paper value is.
Yeah, I think the concept is quite similar to people investing in index fund as well. For example, this year, you cannot use the 4% rule to withdraw your money. So you still have to have your cash buffer, yeah?
Yeah.
You were talking about real estate price getting high or low. It doesn't really affect you. Do you still invest more in new property now, or you just stop?
I have done, since I retired, I've done some real estate investing. I'm mostly very hands-off. I have property managers that manage all the properties. I have done a flip since I retired because someone I used to work with presented it to me, and it was a good deal. And I've done some 1031 exchanges, which are a real estate tax thing here in the US, where basically you can sell a property, purchase other ones, and not pay the taxes. It sort of defers the taxes to later. I've done some of that, but mostly not really acquiring more. Excess cash flow right now does go into index funds just because my portfolio is very heavily real estate weighted. So now I'm just diversifying a little bit more.
Yeah. Also now the price is really high to get in. I've seen the news about the US housing market is crazy compared to what we have over here. So
especially during COVID. Everyone sort of realized during COVID they could work remotely, and so we suddenly had a lot of people who, instead of wanting to be in apartments in the city, when they're stuck at home, they're not going into work and they're at home all the time, instead of wanting to be in a small apartment, wanted to move out to the suburbs and live in a nice house. And so then the demand shot way up, prices shot.
Yeah, it happened to me as well when we were in lockdown in the city. So I moved outside to the countryside and we bought our first home. Not very expensive home, so. Can we talk about kids? Like, a lot of people, especially in Asia, don't plan to have kids because of the cost so high to have kids. You have 3 kids. How do you manage between FIRE and kids and your money expenses?
Me and my now ex-wife, when we first retired, we weren't really sure what our expenses were going to be like because we knew we wanted to travel a lot, and that can be really expensive or it can be done really cheap. And we knew we wanted to have kids. That can be really expensive or it can be done really cheap. It's sort of a thing where I'm frugal with, a lot of things. The kids can be expensive. I think probably the biggest cost here in the US, at least, for having kids is childcare. It's you go to work and then you need to pay thousands of dollars a month for the kid to have childcare. If you're early retired, you don't have to pay that cost because you're the childcare, right? That's one thing that makes it a lot more feasible to have a kid in early retirement, is not having to pay that cost. But beyond that, I think kids can be as expensive as you may. If you want to put them in a fancy private school and have them take horse riding lessons, all these sort of expensive things, then they can certainly cost a lot. But if they're going to the public school, they're playing soccer with their friends at the local park, that's a pretty cheap activity, right? And so I don't think kids have to be.
Okay, I think that makes sense. A lot of people are afraid of getting into FIRE when they have kids though. Like a lot of my fans, a lot of my audience tell me like, oh, my expense is really high. If I get into FIRE, that means my FIRE number is crazy. It's like millions of dollars. How do I manage this? I'm not gonna even make $1 million in this lifetime. So how am I gonna save up to $1 million? Eventually retire. Do you have any advice for people who are having this kind of worry?
Sure. FIRE is how much you need is completely dependent on your expenses. So if they're saying my expenses are really high, I'm never going to save up enough, I would probably agree with them. I would say, yep, that sounds accurate. If you are able to reduce your expenses, and if you need $100,000 a year, then at a 4% safe withdrawal rate, you need $2.5 million saved.
Yeah.
If you only need $40,000 a year, you only need $1 million saved up. So it makes a big difference. If you can live on $20,000 a year, you only need $500,000 saved up. So it very much does make a difference how much you need to live on. And I don't know for your listeners, here in the US, this is true, and I would suspect it's true of most places in the world, but the 3 main expenses here are housing, transportation, and food. So if you can find ways to cut back those 3 main expenses, a lot of times people get caught up in lots of little expenses. Okay, I need to always turn out the lights when I leave the room, that sort of thing. And I saw an article the other day that was like, you might save like like $5 a year by always, being really vigilant about having your lights turned off. Those sort of little things can add up, but a lot of people focus a lot on all these little things instead of the big things. And so they buy a new or fancy car instead of having a used one, or they go out and eat at restaurants all the time instead of cooking at home. If you can focus on those sort of big three categories and reducing your expenses there, then it suddenly becomes a lot easier to reduce your expenses overall and up your savings.
Yeah, I agree. Also on your blog, I read you sometimes write money hacks advice. Do you have any money hacks that you can share with our audience?
So some are very US centric. Like Americans are just ridiculously bad at handling debt. And so credit card companies love to sign us up for credit cards because they make billions a year in profit from people paying interest and late fees and all that sort of stuff. And so they will literally pay you to sign up for credit card, and you can get paid $500 or $1,000 to sign up for a new credit card. There's lots of stuff like that if you're here in the US that you can take advantage of, and various travel hacking and things like that. But otherwise, I think money hacks sort of like sound good, but it's really more the fundamentals, like in terms of if you're going to get to FIRE, and whether that's going to take you 10 or 15 or 20 years, the key is finding what you care about, finding what your values are, and spending money on that, and then cutting ruthlessly on everything else. So, for example, if you really enjoy, if you are a foodie, go ahead and spend money on food, but then cut out spending on having the fanciest, latest iPhone. Cut out spending on having a really fancy car. Cut out all of the other stuff that you don't care about. Even if everyone expects you to have a nice new car, expects you to have all these things, if you don't care about those things, don't spend money on it. Or I have a buddy who loves cars. He has like 4 or 5 cars and he's constantly working on them, and he spends tons of money on cars. He doesn't care that much about them. So he just cooks at home. He eats real simple. It's great. He hardly ever eats out at restaurants. So in terms of you can Google and find lots of money hacks, but my philosophy is more figure out what's important to you. Figure out if you can do that cheaply. For example, a lot of people go to restaurants because they meet their friends there, and it's a social thing. And really, it's not the restaurant that's important. It's the spending time with friends. You could do the same thing by going and having a picnic at the park. So figure out what is it that I'm trying to get out of this experience, and how can I get that cheaper? And then how can I just not spend on all the other stuff I don't care about? And if you do that year after year, you will be a lot happier, and you will find yourself saving lots of money.
Well, I think what you share is very valuable to a lot of our audience, especially the part about figure it out. The reason why you went to a restaurant, is it because of a social thing or because you really like the food? I think that's difference. If you find out what really important to you, it could make a drastic difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if it is important to you, is there a different way you could do it? For example, if you really do love the food and the friends part together, maybe you and your friends take turns rotating who hosts and who cooks. So it's this person's going to make sushi one time and you all go to their house, and then the next person's going to cook Korean barbecue the next time and you all go to their house, and then the next person, and you find a different way to do it that's maybe more frugal for all of you, but you still get that enjoyment, you still get the good food and the friends and that sort of thing.
So the moral of the story is to make friends who can cook.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key, right? Or learn yourself. If food is important to you, then that's a great way to go.
Yeah, totally. Do you mind if we talk about a little bit of the part of when you start investing in houses? How did you get started on your first property? I think a lot of people like to know that. Especially, can I elaborate on that a little? Okay. Because in Asia, a lot of people want to buy a house to live in, not to invest. To a lot of young people, that is a far-fetched dream. They can never save enough for a down payment.
Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about how I got started, and then some thoughts about how someone can get started. I had got my first job out of college. My wife and I, we were teachers in Las Vegas. The US had a big housing crash in 2007, 8, 9, right around there. Las Vegas sort of led the country. They spiked the highest prices, and then they fell the hardest. Most of the US started crashing in 2007, but Vegas started crashing in summer of 2006 was when their prices started falling. And so I moved there in 2007, and I looked at the housing prices and I saw, these houses have been falling. Prices have been falling for the last year and a half. So this must be a good time to buy. So I bought a little condo for us to live in. And that was not a good time to buy. Prices kept falling during 2008, and they fell for another year. And I went, prices have fallen another year. This must be a good time to buy. So I bought our first rental property, and that was not a good time to buy. Prices kept falling in 2009, 2010. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing, and just because prices are falling, that that doesn't mean it's a good investment. It looked like a good investment because it was a house, this one that I bought in 2008, it had sold at the peak of the housing market for $360,000 and I was buying it for $120,000. So I was like, this is a great deal. Well, it kept falling and falling until it was eventually only worth $80,000. But I wasn't selling because I had a renter in there and it was cash flow positive. And so, but at that time I realized like, hey, I really need to figure out what I'm doing. So I went to the public library and I checked out like 20 books on real estate. I read through a bunch of them. Some of them I just flipped through. A lot of them I read the entire thing. I started attending real estate investor meetups 2 or 3 times a week, talking to other investors and learning and going to real estate seminars. And basically it became a hobby for a few years to just learn everything I could about real estate. And so I bought 2 more in 2010, another one in 2011, and prices kept falling and I was kind of almost dollar cost averaging into houses. The prices would fall, I'd buy another one. And then prices bottomed in 2012 and started going up and I bought another one. And then in 2013, Warren Buffett had a comment about if he could buy single family homes like at scale really easily, he'd buy a bunch. And that's when all the hedge funds started coming in and buying a bunch. So Blackstone came into Vegas and they just bought hundreds of homes at a time at auction, everything on the MLS, all the listed homes for sale. They were just buying hundreds of homes. And the prices shot up and it didn't really make sense to invest there anymore. So I spent most of 2013 learning how to invest long distance, learning how to invest in other real estate markets, like halfway across the country, how to evaluate markets, what makes a good real estate market versus a bad real estate market, and how to build a team there to buy houses that I'd never seen and to get them fixed up and get them rented out and things like that. And so that's what I eventually did and started buying properties in other places in the US. And so that was sort of my journey, is like thinking, hey, prices are down, this must be a good buy. And then realizing like, I need to learn a little bit more and spending just years absorbing. And I really enjoyed real estate as a hobby. And that's who I think it's best suited for, is someone who enjoys it, who likes learning about it, who picks up a real estate, like a beginner's real estate book and reads it and goes like, oh, that's really interesting. But I think anybody can do it. I think the ones who shouldn't are people who would stress, who would be anxious and stay awake at night thinking about it. Because at the end of the day, it's an investment, it's a business, but it's something you need to be able to detach emotionally from and say like, oh man, we just had this, $3,000 repair that was not expected. And but if it's giving you anxiety, if it's causing you to lose sleep, then you might want to have a different investment that you can detach a little bit more. As far as getting started and trying to save up money, so there are various ideas. Are you familiar with the concept of a house hack?
Yeah, it doesn't work here.
Yeah, so it doesn't work there.
We don't have duplex.
Everything's a single family home or an apartment?
Apartment is more common in Taiwan, yeah, because our land is quite small. It's not like in the US, like massive space.
Right. What do people do? Like, who are the landlords there? Who own the properties that are for rent?
In Taiwan, there's a unique way of something similar like house hacking. Let me elaborate a little bit for the audience. House hacking is you buy a duplex and you live in half and you rent the other half. Like in Taiwan, you can buy an apartment and you cut it in like a few rooms and you live in one room and you can rent out the other room. Yeah, it's kind of similar.
Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of one way you could get started, is planning to subdivide up the apartment and rent it out. You can also partner with people. If you don't have the ability to get started on your own, work on getting funds from, if you can have a couple people go in together and all purchase a place together. Say you were going to divide up that apartment into four spots to rent out, 4 rooms to rent out. Instead, you get 4 friends. Instead of having to come up with the entire down payment yourself, you only need to come up with 1/4 of a down payment, and you each now have a room in an apartment that you're starting to build equity on. And then you all go in on purchasing another one for rent, and you each own 1/4 of it, and you rent out all 4 of those rooms. And maybe the next time you only need to go in with one other person and you each own half of it until you sort of start to scale up. But looking at essentially more creative ways to then going like, I need to save up all of this on my own. Is there a way that you can save up part of it and leverage other people's money to be able to get your toe in the door?
I think that's a really amazing tip, leveraging other people's money. So network is important.
Yes. There's a saying that real estate is a people business, and it's really true. I found the vast majority of properties I own are because of people I met and people I know who have brought them to me and said, hey, what do you think about buying this property? So I think even if you don't have a lot of funds to start out with, starting to get out and network and meet other people and look for opportunities.
Yeah, totally. For for someone who wants to retire early using real estate or any other method, but they don't know where to start, where would you advise they should start doing?
First thing I would say is start tracking your expenses. If you are just spending money every month and you have no idea how much you spend, you have no idea where your money is going, start tracking. You'll start to notice where there's sort of leaks in your spending, where money is going that you didn't realize you were spending as much on and things like that. So start tracking your spending and work on reducing your big expenses like we talked about. And then I sort of increase the gap between what you earn and what you spend. If you can start to earn a little bit more, whether that's doing side gigs to earn extra money, whether that's trying to switch jobs so that you can get a pay increase, try and bump up your income, and then at the same time try and reduce your expenses. So you're increasing that gap between what you make and what you spend, and all of that extra is your saving. And start to then take that savings and invest it and try and snowball that, if it's real estate, into your first investment, and if it's index funds, into just your first, couple shares. And what is going to happen is your progress is going to be very slow for a long time. And that's because it's just it takes a while to get going, and exponential graphs always look flat at the beginning and then they start to curve up. So the hard part is sort of that middle period between when you're really excited about the idea of FIRE and like, yes, I'm going to do this and I'm going to get my expenses down and I'm going to save so much money, and you're really into the concept and excited about it, and then you're sort of doing it, but your progress is slow, and that can be disheartening. If you can stick with it and if you can continue and sort of slow and steady wins the race, eventually you will hit that point where it starts to snowball, where you only owned part of an apartment before, but then later you own a half of one, and later you own one entirely by yourself, and you have the whole thing rented out. And then it starts to snowball where you have more and more money coming in each month. That means you can buy another one faster, which gives you more money, which means you can buy the next one even faster, and it all starts to compound. But it's really that middle part where between when you're really excited about the concept and when you start to see it snowball that you have to have discipline. Or my favorite way is you just have to forget about it and have it all on autopilot. And what I mean by that, if you can get your expenses low, but get to a lifestyle that you're happy with and keep improving your income, and then stop checking what your stock portfolio is at. Stop looking at when am I going to buy the next house. When you have enough money, you'll see and you'll go make a purchase, but you don't need to check every day. What are your balances? You don't need to obsess over it. At that point, step back and go, okay, I'm on autopilot. I'm saving money every month. I'm working towards FIRE. And now I'm going to go ahead and go enjoy life. I'm going to do activities that make me happy. I'm going to go to the park and hang out with my friends. I'm going to go exercise. I'm going to go learn a new hobby. And I think the people who I've seen who are the most unhappy in the FIRE movement are the ones who are so impatient for FIRE, but so far away. And so they're sitting there and they're miserable and they're wishing they could be fired, and they're just living a really unhappy life. And I find that really sad. So my hope is that people would go, hey, look, here's what I want my life to look like in FIRE. I want to have a day where I want to sleep in without an alarm clock, and then I want to have a healthy breakfast with lots of fresh fruit, and then I want to go spend some time with friends, and I want to go for a jog, and figure out what they want their retired life to look like, and then see how much of those things can I get into my life right now? How much of those activities, how much of those, maybe when I'm retired, I want to read a little more. Was there a way I can do that now in my life? And try and make sure you're enjoying your life as much now as possible. And that doesn't require spending a lot of times. And I found a lot of people's sort of dream of the retired life when they talk about what their day might look like. It's not like, I'm going to go fly on my private jet to my private island to do these things. It's like, I'm going to go for a walk by the river, and I'm going to, spend some time with my parents who are getting older. And I'm going to, and they talk about these sort of more simple things almost that just sound pleasant. And so I think work towards FIRE, work on your savings and your investment, and then stop worrying about it, stop obsessing about it, and think about how can I have those things I really enjoy, and how can I do that now and make sure I'm enjoying my life today.
Yeah. It takes a long time to get to FIRE, but it doesn't take a lot to be happy now.
That's right.
Thank you so much for sharing all this. Oh, really? I think this episode is gonna be crazy, girl. Thank you so much.
OK， 希望呢你喜欢今天的影片。如果这个影片呢有启发到你、有帮助到你的话，记得帮我按个喜欢哦。记得订阅这频道，我每个礼拜呢都会上传新的影片。然后梦想如果搭配行动的话，永远只是梦想。我们下次再见喽，拜。